The Olivier Rebbot Award for Best Photography in Magazines, sponsored by Newsweek, goes to the AP photographer David Guttenfelder for his pictures in National Geographic of last year's other amazing event, Japan's closed-off nuclear exclusion zone after the destruction of the nuclear power plant following the earthquake and tsunami. When the OPC was tracking down David to tell him that he won an award, he was in rural Albania. But I believe tonight he is coming directly from Pyongyang, North Korea.
Can I put this down?
I could hold it for you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. As you just mentioned, there was a triple disaster in Japan this year, at the beginning of last year. The 9.0 earthquake, the tsunami, and then the explosion of the Daiichi nuclear power plant. At some point, a month into covering the story, I began to realize that we were only covering, at least we photojournalists, were only covering 2 of the 3 parts of that disaster, and that we had all, for various reasons, had not been covering the nuclear issue. Mainly this is because the Japanese government had blocked it off. There was a 20-kilometer radius exclusion zone around the plant, but also because we were afraid of the unknown. I decided, and I was determined to try to cover this part of the story that I had up till then ignored. And at that time, the National Geographic magazine executive editor of photography, Kurt Muchler, called me on the telephone and asked me if I was willing and able to go inside the exclusion zone. And I said, yeah, no problem, I can work it out, it's easy. So I'd like to thank Kurt and Susan Welchman, who edited the story, and Ken Geiger, who's here tonight, for believing in me, because truthfully I had no idea how I would get into the zone. I got in with dog catchers, or at least that's what I called them. They were a father and son animal rights activists who were skirting around the barricades through the mountains to go inside the zone to feed and rescue abandoned pets and farm animals. And I followed them, and then they became sort of invested in what I was doing, and we started to work together. We traveled together, we slept in abandoned schoolhouses and in gas stations, and we shared our safety equipment and educated each other on how to be safe in that environment. We really looked after one another, and I couldn't have done the story without them. We called the story in that magazine, ultimately, when it was published, Japan's Nuclear Refugees, because it was about people. But ironically, I was working inside the zone, which was completely abandoned, working in ghost towns where there were no people. So I had to find ways to show signs of life. And in the end, they were everywhere. There were footsteps in the mud and unmade beds left behind and food left on people's tables. And of course, I also had to show that these places were radioactive and poisoned. And of course, that's invisible. And I met a lot of these people. There were some 80,000 evacuees from inside the zone living in shelters, mainly in cardboard cubicles. Most of the people that were affected by the tsunami, as tragic as it was, were able to begin to think about how to move on with their lives and to rebuild. But the people of Fukushima and from this nuclear exclusion area, then and now are still living in limbo. And it's really probably a generation or 2 or more before people will know the true effects of what happened and whether or not these people can go back home. Thank you very much.